So here are the most common ways in which you can actually differentiate in your music classroom. Now, these are very broad, generalized strategies that any teacher, no matter what content area, could use. So really take these to heart and reflect on how you can apply them into your music classroom and your music content area and how it can work for you, right? A really big thing that I want to point out, though, is that with all of these differentiation strategies that you see on your screen, the thing that really drives the strategies and or how you're going to differentiate in your classroom for your students is assessment. So without that assessment piece attached to differentiation, you really don't know where your students are. So that's why it's always good to do things like diagnostic assessments, having those checks for understandings as formative assessments, and then having summative assessments to see where your students actually are in their learning process. So that's another big piece of teaching in our our content area of music in general. But in order to effectively differentiate for your students in your classroom, it has to be driven by assessment. You can't just simply go, oh, I'm going to do it like this and hope they understand, when they may really not even need assistance in or support in a particular area that you're teaching in music, whether that is whatever skill you're teaching at the moment, right? So the first one is adapting the assignment or the activity. The second is increase the rigor of the assignment or activity, or decrease if you need to. The third is utilizing student groupings in different ways to your advantage and to your students' advantage as well. And then actually the fourth one, adapting the learning environment itself in which you're teaching. So remember, you have these strategies that you can use, but what drives those strategies is going to be assessment, and the results from those assessments will ultimately help you choose which one of these strategies to use for your students in your classroom. So when we're talking about adapting an assignment or an activity, this is a really great strategy to use for students who may need additional support or extra help in a particular area or musical skill that you may be teaching in your classroom. And we can do this in a couple of ways. The first is content, and that's actually what skill are you teaching. You might need to, based on where they are at in their learning process, you may need to adapt some of the concepts that you're teaching to a level that they can understand in that time at that moment. The second is process. You may need to adapt how you're actually teaching the activity or the assignment so that your students can be successful. And the last one is product. It's basically the result. You're adapting the result based on your teaching that you want your students to do. So those are the three basic ways in general that we can adapt the assignment. Now we're going to look a little bit more deeper into how it can look in music. So when we're talking about adapting the content of an assignment or an activity, there's a couple of ways that we can kind of think about that. But I want to make an important notion that we're not changing the skill. Like, the skill is going to remain the same, but we are adapting it to meet our students where they are in their learning process. And we can do that a couple of ways. I have three examples here you can see on your screen, but there are tons of different ways you could do this in your own music classroom. You just might have to be a little bit creative. So one of the first ideas is, say you're in some sort of rehearsal or a practice session with your students. For those ones that may need additional support in a skill that you're trying to teach, maybe in a whole group setting, with that kind of large group rehearsal atmosphere, the student may need a simpler part within the arrangement or the repertoire that you're in which you are performing, right? Or practicing or rehearsing. And that's totally okay. Obviously, that is driven by that assessment piece that we talked about earlier, where you kind of know where your students are. So you probably more than likely already give them the part that they are going to be successful in. It may be a little challenging for them, but they're still going to be successful. Again, that's that natural piece. You've already kind of done playing test or found your seating chair groups within a chorus or things like that. And you've already done that kind of diagnostic piece, so you know what pieces students can handle based on all of that kind of assessment data that you have gotten from those assessments, right? So giving them a simpler part, maybe the part that you've given is still too hard. That's fine. Give them a part that is even more simplified that they will be successful at until they can reach the level that they need to be for that repertoire of assignment, right? The next one is like during small groups. Maybe you're working in sectionals in whether it's, sopranos, altos, tenors, basses, or however you have your, choir set up, for instance. Each group may need additional support. Maybe your chorus, for instance, is having a difficult time with a rhythmic section in the repertoire that you're using. Or maybe in general music, the students that are working on the xylophones are having trouble holding the mallets properly. Taking that time to not solely focus on that, but have them work on it together as a small group kind of breakout session, and give them practice on whether that's the rhythmic notation that they're trying to work on as it applies to their to the repertoire that they're learning, or whether it applies to the instruments that they're trying to figure out, and bodily aware with the technique in general music. Having that small group sectional kind of idea will allow you, as the teacher, you're still teaching the same skill, you're just kind of honing in and giving them additional support there. And then really just modifying things for students who need assistance with. For instance, maybe in general music you have dance moves that they're too hard for a student, or they're not able to connect why you're doing a certain dance move as a response to a certain kind of music, right? Or maybe the rhythm that they're teaching maybe their rhythm in a band repertoire is just too hard for the students. So it's a big run of 16th notes, right? So maybe you just have the student play the eighth notes of that 16th note run in the band kind of setting, or orchestra kind of setting. Those are the kind of modifications that I'm talking about in regard to the content. They're still doing the same skill, but they're just doing it at a level in which they are successful. It might be a little challenging for them, but you're ultimately getting there step by step, kind of in small baby steps, as opposed to big leaps and bounds, right? So when we're talking about adapting the process of an assignment or an activity, it can be something as simple as allowing students some extra practice time. Maybe they understand and can do what you're asking them to do, but it's just taking them a little extra time to get there, right? That's totally fine. For those students, give them that extra practice time, and the students that are already at that level, give them an extra challenge of some sort, right? Maybe some students need some sort of visual aid. Maybe they're visual learners, and that's how they can grasp information and kind of connect the dots with visual aids, right? That could be in the form of solfege hand signs posted around your classroom, different kind of posters that represent either musical terminology or rhythm values or something like that. Even displaying song lyrics or simplified song lyrics for your students to be able to maybe memorize a particular song for rehearsal, for instance. Maybe they don't need the notation anymore, they just need the words, for instance. It's just examples I'm giving out to you, right? Maybe they are not successful on the instrument that they are playing, maybe in a general music setting, that they're trying to figure out the technique on a xylophone, and they just aren't there yet. So maybe you give them another instrument that they can be successful on, that's maybe a single pitch that they will be able to perform on for the same assignment as everyone else, but they're going to be successful just like everyone else will be successful. Or maybe regardless of the content area in music, providing that hand over hand assistance, whether that's learning recorder and kind of showing them that way, or another instrument, for instance, in band or orchestra, having kind of that one-on-one, hand over hand guiding help to get there. Maybe students in general music are having a hard time keeping the beat, so you're tapping them on the shoulders to help them feel the beat. Things like that don't necessarily change the content that you're teaching, but it's changing how you're teaching it so that they can be successful. So the process is all about the how of adapting an assignment and activity. Now, when we talk about adapting the product of an assignment or an activity, we're not talking about the content, the specific skill we're teaching. We're not talking about the process, which is how we actually teach that specific skill. We're talking about the product, that final result that we want our students to be able to do, right? Or perform, in our case, right, for music. That's the product, and we can adapt that in tons of different ways, but one of the easiest ways is to actually just narrow the parameters or the requirements of the assignment or the activity. Say you have a playing test or a singing test in your ensembles, and the students can't sing or perform the entire thing yet, but you narrow the parameters. Okay, so in the 16 bar section of our repertoire, I want you to sing the first 8 measures of it and then continue to work on the second 8 measures. That kind of thing, narrowing those parameters so that they can be successful. They're not neglecting those 8 bars that they can't do, but they're showing you that at least they can sing the first 8 bars of that particular repertoire or play the repertoire itself. In some sort of composition activity, it may be narrowing the parameters. Maybe instead of writing rhythm and melody together, they get with a partner. They're still doing the same thing. The partner writes the rhythm, the other partner writes the melody, and they try to come together to have both on a staff. Or you flip that, and maybe the student writes the melody and the other student writes the rhythm, and they collaborate together with that, and so on and so forth. They're still doing the same thing. They're still composing, but they're doing it in a way that they can be successful. Again, not to be neglectful of the thing that they are not successful in, because they're still working on that. But they are showing you, they're performing for you, presenting to you what they can do based on what you've taught them. Again, this kind of helps as a summative assessment as you kind of continue that whole assessment cycle to say, okay, well, my student, they're having trouble with composing both rhythm and melody, so I need to really work on how you write melodies. And that's kind of that feedback that you're getting from that assessment, data that you collect from those summative assessments that drives your instruction further so that they can be successful later on, right? Another way that you could do it in your classroom is maybe a student is really successful in a particular section of repertoire or a part of the song. Maybe you're singing in general music, but they're not as good at one other section. So you're kind of giving them the option to play just this one section. Maybe it's a folk song that has a form of A, B, A, and they only sing the A sections and they are working on the B section, for instance. So giving the students the option to show you what they do know and be able to articulate too what they need to work on as well, I think is also beneficial. So those are just a couple of ways that you can adapt the product of an assignment or activity and still allow for students to be successful even though they need additional support in other areas that you will continually work on with them.